friends, and welcome to episode 142 of Did You Bring the Hummus podcast. I'm Kimberly, your host, and I'm super excited to be here with you today. Did You Bring the Hummus is a podcast for all things vegan. Before we get started, I have one very important question for you. Did you bring the hummus? Today, I am joined by vegan mindset coach Anita Marriott. Anita is a veterinarian and sustainability professional turned coach. She helps clients in 4 big ways, coaching them through Vistopia, helping them develop effective communication skills, providing mindset and emotional support, and finding alignment in their purpose. Hey, Anita, welcome. I'm so glad you're here with me.
Oh, thank you, Kimberly. I'm so very honored to be on your podcast.
I am really looking forward to this conversation. I know that you are connected to Claire Mann, who has been on the podcast as well, and she's the genius behind Vistopia, and we will get to, we'll remind, if you don't mind me asking you to, remind the listeners what Vistopia is, and then we'll dig into some of those other things. But before we do that, I'd love for you to share with me your vegan journey.
Sure. Well, mine was a very long one, as I'm sure a lot of people's is, because while we make the decision to become vegan in an instant, I'm absolutely convinced that for most of us, it's a years-long journey of getting there. Right. Even those of us who say, oh, I found out on this one day and then I immediately became vegan. The reality is none of us live in a complete bubble of ignorance, right? So we all grow up eating meat and animal products, and we know that if there's an animal on our plate, it had to die, and there was probably some discomfort involved in that. So we all have some level of knowledge. So very few of us come from a complete state of blissful ignorance to awareness, change in a day, and then stay that way forever. So for me, it was a story of coming from a background where we grew and raised all our own food, pretty much from a subsistence farming kind of background. So what that means is that from my earliest memories, I was surrounded by animals who I considered to be my friends. I always connected with them deeply. And most of these animals had names. And not just given by me, but by my family, who also, were good, kind people who cared about animals. But we had all been raised in this belief that it was normal, natural, and necessary to eat these animals, even if we did consider them to be our friends. So what we did was we raised them in a way where we felt that we were genuinely giving them the best of care and the very best possible life until that one terrible day. And so while it felt awful for a moment, we did not see that there was any other possibility, right? So we were all born into and raised in this system of carnism, which is this ideology that animals are there for us to use and consume and to exploit as we see fit. And the core belief of that is that it is in fact normal, natural, and necessary, and maybe even a little bit nice, because there's something wholesome about consuming animals. So that's the background I come from. So I would see these animals, I would connect with them, and then one day they would just be gone, and it would be sad. And then I knew that the animals I was eating were coming from our own property, but there was no real alternative. I just had to be okay with that, to kind of push down my sadness and accept it as this is just the natural order of things. So that worked reasonably well for me until I was a teenager, and I started to share a little bit more of the responsibility in the raising of these animals, including, hand raising the ones that were orphaned or somehow injured, those kinds of things, where they started to feel a little bit more, even more so like my family and even my babies. And at the age of 16, it came time to, and I hope this isn't too triggering for your audience, but to actually to kill a pig. And my dad had been regularly slaughtering pigs previously, but I hadn't been involved in it prior to that. On this one particular day, he didn't have any other helpers. I was 16 years old. He thought I was pretty capable at that age. It was only a small young pig, far from fully grown, small enough that the two of us could do this. And so he said to me, you are going to hold down the pig while I cut the pig's throat. And that is what I did, because you didn't say no to my dad. So as horrifying as the thought of that was, I went ahead and I was a good obedient child and I did this. And that's when I was really confronted with the reality of what it is to take the life of an animal, particularly an animal who does not want to die, and one that I also had this personal connection with. So now as I'm holding down this poor little pig who's struggling and looking me directly into the eyes, and I felt him pleading with me. I could see that betrayal in his eyes. And as I, looked at my reflection in his eyes, I saw a monster. And that was the beginning of my vegan journey at the age of 16. Now, I wish I could have said that on that day I decided to become vegan and that was it. That was the end of the story. It wasn't, because I had all of this lifetime of learning and conditioning and belief systems to unlearn. At this point, I still believed that it was necessary to be eating animals for us to be healthy. And so about the thing that did happen was this incredible visceral reaction where from that day on, I simply could not consume pigs. So a few hours later, when I could smell the flesh of this pig cooking, it turned my stomach. I immediately became nauseated. I had to leave the house and I could not go back for a long time. And so to this day, from that day onwards, from the age of 16, I haven't consumed pigs. I also started to feel a little bit that way about the chickens. I also started to avoid eating anything that had our chickens in it. And so for the last couple of years living at home, I think I subsisted mostly on bread and cereal, trying to avoid eating my friends. And then I went off to residential college in the big city to become a vet, to study at university to become a veterinarian. And I lived on campus, and I turned up and I announced myself as vegetarian. I'd like to sign up as vegetarian, please. I'll be eating off the vegetarian menu. And I very quickly learned that was not going to be possible for me. So having come from this very meat-heavy background to a place where the vegetarian food was, how do I describe it? Let's say highly inadequate. I'll call it inedible for me. I did not think I could survive on that. And so I ended up compromising and backsliding. So with the exception of the meals that had pig flesh in them, I was still eating the meat dishes. So yeah, it's very much a story of 20 years of 2 steps forward, 1 step back. So at university, then obviously I studied to become a veterinarian. I thought, this is it. I have arrived. This is my purpose. I'd wanted to be a vet since I was 6 years old when I first learned that vets existed. I wanted to be there to help the animals, to help my friends. And very quickly at veterinary school, we were inducted into the world of animal agriculture. And, that brainwashing of carnism just continued, that these industries were necessary to feed the world. They were very important and we were here to serve them. And we were very quickly told that if we were to be taken seriously as professionals, we had to learn to speak the language of the industries, right? So we had to de-individualize these animals and start to refer to them as livestock, as head of cattle, as units of production. It was very intentionally removing our connection from the animals so that we could be in service to this system. And so over the 5 years of veterinary school, I must say, it had some impact. I did absolutely become institutionalized, I guess, in a way, into that way of thinking. At the same time, I was also exposed to factory farming, because doing the practical work, we had to go and spend weeks at piggeries and in feedlots and dairy farms and all the rest of it. So I actually did get to see this industrialized form of agriculture, which I hadn't experienced at home, where the animals were free and happy running around and so forth. And I was horrified. And so through veterinary school, I decided that even though I was still accepting that these industries were necessary to feed the world, I could not possibly be part of this. I could not work for these industries. And I did at that point make the decision that as soon as I possibly could, I would in fact become vegetarian. So I would stop eating their flesh. So that was where I got to at the end of veterinary school. When I went and got my first job, I became a small animal veterinarian where I could focus on the companion animals that people loved, and I could genuinely care for animals that were well taken care of and loved, and I could feel fully aligned in what I was doing. I wasn't harming them. And then came the next shock because very soon after starting my first job, in came the racing greyhounds, the ex-racing greyhounds, the rejects from the industry that would turn up every week, dumped at our door. Well, it was an agreement with the trainers and the practice that they would donate their unwanted dogs, and we would sedate them, drain them of their blood, which we would then store as blood donations for our patients, and then we would put them to sleep and dispose of them. So that was the agreement. Of course, this was horrifying to me because here I was having, dedicated my life to the service of animals, to helping them, to saving them. Here I was taking the lives of perfectly healthy dogs who did not want to die, in a way that we could exploit them further. Like after they had already been fully exhausted by the industry, this was the final insult. This is how they were dying. And of course it was a traumatizing experience for me. But at that point, I was actually already starting to work towards becoming vegetarian. I had to learn how to cook from scratch because that wasn't my experience. But over the coming years, by the time I finally burned out 5 years later as a veterinarian, and we won't go into that today, but I was burnt out and emotionally exhausted from that job. By that point, I was ready to go vegetarian. In fact, I did go vegetarian. I did not think at that point it was possible to survive without consuming milk products, so cow's milk products, dairy. That was still a piece of the brainwashing that continued for me. And so I went on to be a fairly happy vegetarian, knowing I wasn't killing animals to eat their flesh. I was putting on the blinkers about dairy and trying to forget what I'd seen as a vet student. And I was aware of the egg industry. Initially, I went to free range eggs only. Eventually, I realized that there is still no humane way to do that system. And I compromised by rescuing chickens from the egg system and only eating the eggs from my happy backyard chickens. Eventually, of course, those blinkers came off too, and I had to recognize what happened to the male chicks and so forth, and that I was just ultimately propping up the industry by doing this. But the final moment, that instantaneous decision for me, came 20 years after that incident with the pig. So I was already 36 years old. I'd left the veterinary profession. I had been vegetarian for 10 years, working in environmental sustainability, trying to protect the environments that all the free living animals were living in. And I came across a poster on my way to work that a vegan activist had pinned up. And it was a beautiful black and white little calf from a dairy cow, so from the dairy industry, and the text was as if it was written from mum, saying, "Help, my baby has been stolen from me." And it told the story of the dairy calf in the dairy industry. And of course, I was already aware of this, but for some reason, at that point, I had arrived at that stage in my life where I was ready to take the blinkers off, where I couldn't ignore it anymore. Where I think every single "what about" that I'd had, all the what about this, what about that we all hear from non-vegans. I think that was it. I think that was the last one was gone with that poster. And in that moment, I decided, that's it. I'm going to be vegan. So that is my very, very long journey of taking steps forwards and then backsliding and eventually making that decision.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. I love hearing everybody's vegan journey, because we all come to the same place, but we get here from so many different avenues. And it really speaks to just how possible it is for the majority of the world, especially in the more industrialized areas, to be able to live fully vegan, with, as the definition, of course, includes as far as possible and practicable, right? We live in a non-vegan world, all of that little nuance, whatever. But it really shows that you can find a way, because someone who works on, whether it's their family farm or a larger farm, if they heard someone else tell that story, they would be like, well, they don't understand where I'm coming from. This is our livelihood. This is what we do. This is just how it is. But then they hear your story and they're like, oh, okay, maybe it isn't. And maybe there is another way. And two, this idea that like people can go vegan overnight. Some people do. I didn't either. I had a long journey as well. I was vegetarian for a long time. And then finally was like, what are you doing? And then went vegan, and it feels like an overnight decision. But you're right. There are all of these little moments throughout our lives that point us in this direction and get us to this point. So I appreciate hearing a nice long story around the vegan journey, because it does take us to a place that I feel is so much more relatable than I watched this documentary and I went vegan overnight and I changed my whole life. And, it's really not possible for everybody. So thank you for sharing some reality.
Oh, you're so welcome. Yeah. 20 years of unlearning.
Yeah. That's the other thing too. Like there is so much that we have learned. We've been indoctrinated with this idea that we can't be healthy without certain foods, and that we just can't live a full, happy life without taking someone else's. And until we see it that way, that we are taking someone else's life, and we're really clear on that piece of it, I think it is very easy to go, I just don't know if that's healthy enough. I don't know if I can do that. My grandmother didn't eat that way. Like they can find so many ways to skirt around it. But yeah, so it is possible. And I love that my listeners get to hear so many of the ways that people find their way to this most beautiful life of being vegan. So I'd like to move into your work and some of the things that we wanted to talk about tonight. So first, as I mentioned at the top of the show, you've got this connection with Claire Mann. You've trained with her. And so if you could first remind the listeners of what Vistopia is. And of course, I'll include a link to Claire's episode so that when the listeners are done with this one, they can go back and listen to hers. But if you could just give like a quick overview of what Vistopia is, and then how you kind of take it a little bit further.
Sure. Happy to do that. So just to do that little recap, as you said, Claire coined the term Vistopia to describe that anguish of being vegan in a non-vegan world. And to me, it consists of two key components. And I think, according to Claire as well, I think I'm just describing it in my own way. The first is that burden of knowing that Claire talks about. So once we actually do open our eyes to the full extent of the exploitation and the suffering in the animal world, we do feel like we take on that burden of knowing of that. And that in itself creates a great deal of distress for us. And then that burden and that distress then compels us to share with the people around us what we have learned, the truth. Mm-hmm. Even if it's taken us 20 years to learn it, even if we've known much of it for a lot, suddenly we decide, now the blinkers are genuinely off. Now we really see the world for how it is. And so we need to tell everyone. And when we do, almost invariably, the people around us, our friends, our family, our colleagues, have one of two reactions. One, it seems to dismiss it and not want to know about it, or to actually, to become defensive and to turn it around and attack the messenger. Mm-hmm. And when we have that experience added to the burden of knowing, now what happens is that we feel like we've woken as that stranger in a strange land, to borrow Claire's expression again, where we suddenly don't even recognize these people we thought we knew so well, who shared our values and our beliefs. So it's that combination of the two things, the burden and then that disconnect, that isolation, that not recognizing the people around us. Suddenly we feel like we've been cut adrift. So that's that experience of vestopia. And then it comes with a whole range more emotions, which we can go into later. So yes, does that answer the question about vestopia? What was the follow-up part to that?
Yeah. It's all good. Thank you. Yes, that does. And just a quick thought. I made a note as you were talking. When we have these experiences, we're learning about like why people go vegan, when we're inspired to do it ourselves. And then like you said, we talk to the people who we believe hold the same values that we do. Because like when we go vegan, it feels like we're waking up those values, not that we suddenly have different ones, right? At least that was my experience. And in talking to lots of other vegans, it very much feels like, oh, this is actually what kindness or compassion or, connection really means. So then when we look around at the people who we love and whom we spend our lives with, maybe we even share a home with, and we tell them these things and they don't immediately join you, or maybe not even immediately, but I know of some vegans who have been married to someone for decades who has never, they're not even interested in their veganism, let alone join them. And I wonder, like, how do we get them to stop seeing that as personal choice? Because I think this is where people can separate and distance and then not take on our view of the world and our values, because they see it like it's good for, I respect that you've gone vegan. So yes, just respect me for not, because they see it as this is what you're doing for your life, not this is what we're doing because we're trying to improve the lives or stop the exploitation is what we're working toward, is stopping the exploitation of all of these other lives of beings around the world. And so just as you were saying that, this idea of sharing our values and this connection that we have with people, I wonder, and maybe this is a conversation for another time, like this idea of like, are they seeing that as this is personal choice versus really that what we are experiencing is that awakening or that like expanding of what our values truly are. And it's just like, do you even have the same values I do? Like, do you understand connection or, compassion? I don't know. It just, you said that and it like sent me off in another direction.
Yeah. No, it's a great point. And I think this is actually a trap that we fall into with dystopia, is that we start believing that the values we thought we had observed in our fellow humans were actually not present, that we had been wrong, that they didn't actually have the values of kindness and compassion and all of those things that we thought we shared with them. The reality is they do have them. They're just compartmentalized. So basically they're contained within this ideology of carnism, where the animals that we use and exploit and consume are just held outside of the box of those values. So those values apply to those that we have a direct connection with and care about. And when we become vegan, we take those values out of the box and they start to apply to all sentient beings. And so that is where you're absolutely right. I think we just expand on those. It's an expansion of those values. So helping people to first of all see that these people suddenly haven't turned into, flesh-eating zombies who have no values. They still have those values. And yes, the reason they're considering it to be a personal choice is because they don't consider the animals that they have grown up consuming and using to be sentient individuals, to be considered in that way, that those are just objects for us to use, and therefore our values don't apply to them. So this is where, and this is where we do tend to then go wrong, is we try to force them to see what we see, where it's not possible. We cannot pull them out of that trance of carnism by force. Or, the way I like to see it is it's a lens, right? We all walk around wearing these lenses that cause us to see the world through a certain way, or in a certain way. And as long as we are still consuming animals, even as vegetarians, as long as we're still consuming any of their products, we're still wearing that lens of carnism that says it is okay to be using and exploiting animals. As a vegetarian, it might be slightly modified to also say, as long as we make sure that we do it as kindly as possible, right? As long as we minimize the suffering. But we're still wearing that lens of carnism. And then what happens in the instant that we turn vegan is that lens is removed. Yeah. And we think in that instant that we now see the world clearly. We see it for the way it truly is. What we don't realize is we immediately replace that lens with a different one. And we tend to replace it with a lens of animal suffering. Now we're, for the first time, now that we're no longer contributing to that suffering, we allow ourselves to actually see the world through the animal's eyes and give them full consideration as sentient individuals. Excuse me for the morning croakies, right? Because it is early morning here where I am. So now we've put on this lens of animal suffering, and that's part of forming that lens of dystopia. So now we're walking around with a very different lens to everyone else around us. It doesn't mean we don't share the same values. We're just applying them through the view of this very, very different lens, right? And then so with the second lens we then put on when we don't get the reaction that we're expecting from the people around us is this lens of seeing these people as other suddenly. So this is where we make those decisions about, oh, they don't really share our values. We don't even know who they are. They seem alien to us. They are just these flesh-eating zombies, these monsters, right? The monsters that we didn't see ourselves to be, of course, only a short while before. So that's it. And then we start walking around with these lenses, but we think we can see the world clearly. We believe that what we're now thinking about these people and the non-vegan world is just the truth. And then that gets in the way because now we are communicating from this place where we're seeing our fellow human beings, often our closest loved ones, as people who are selfish because they value their taste pleasure over and above consideration of animals, or they are cowardly because they are too afraid to see the truth. So we're walking around with this perception, and we start to feel contempt for people. We start to feel like they are morally somehow below us. And as we go on to communicate with them and try to convince them and share what we know, we can't help but convey those feelings, the judgment, the contempt, the frustration, the anger we feel. It comes out. No matter how much we try to hide it and try to be nice about it, it still comes across because our body language and our tone of voice, they betray us. And so when people sense that, they immediately become defensive and the message is lost. Instead, they focus on us as the messenger and they shoot the messenger. Suddenly we are the, moralizing, superior, holier than thou, bleeding heart vegan who's telling them that they're wrong. And how dare we when they're the normal ones? So this is how we create this for ourselves with our dystopia.
Oh, wow. That is, yes, I have experienced all of those things. And I like to think that I have come to terms with that idea that the lens is different. My view is different. And so I try to approach others who don't yet have the same lens because I'm hopeful that everyone eventually will find those lenses. I hope that I do approach them with more kindness and care than I used to when I was really feeling that judgment and the difficulty in having those conversations with people, where I was definitely passing judgment on how are you not feeling differently about this now that you know? How do you not see things differently after living with me or having conversations with me for decades, so that I really appreciate the way you kind of took us through that whole experience. I think there'll be a lot of people who on, both from the vegan side who felt this and went through this process, but also maybe some of the listeners who aren't yet vegan but they know vegans. And so they may have felt this very, may have had this very experience. And now maybe they'll have a deeper understanding of why they were getting that judgment from that vegan person, why they felt that coming their way. So cool, Anita. Thank you. So one of the things that you mentioned is there are 4 ways that we undermine ourselves because of dystopia. So I feel like you've talked through some of that. Did we cover all 4? I want to make sure we hit all of the points. Okay.
I think we've covered 1.
Excellent.
We've kind of touched on one, so I'll run through them now. And as I do, I would invite your audience to consider to what extent each of these is showing up in their own lives. So the first of the 4 ways in which dystopia sort of undermines our effectiveness as vegans in the world, so our effectiveness at changing the world and moving others. First is what we do to our relationships, and that's the one that we've touched on now. So I'm going to call that kind of like a loss of our non-vegan relationships, an alienation or a distancing from our friends, our family, and our colleagues. So we end up, to a certain extent, isolating ourselves from meaningful connection with these people because it is too painful, and because we are now seeing them as these alien folks we just no longer identify with and simply can't understand. So this loss of relationships, this disconnection, is both a symptom of our dystopia and then contributes even further to it, because the more disconnected and less effective we are at communicating with these folks, the more anguished we feel. So that's the first one. And I think a lot of us would identify with this. Yeah. The second way in which we undermine ourselves is then we burn ourselves out. And not everyone does this, but I've seen it happen a lot. And this is the activist burnout syndrome, right? So for some of us, we're driven to this by the fact that the people closest to us are not receptive to our vegan message. So we think, well, if the people closest to us won't listen, I'm going to take my message to the world. I'm going to take it to strangers. I'm going to start engaging in street activism, online activism, doing vigils, doing, open rescues, whatever it might be, to get the message out there to the world. And I mean, some of us will do this in parallel even before we alienate our family and give up on them, right? Some of us just become activists straight away and just want to get out there and do as much as possible. Because once we're seeing the world through this lens of the victims, we want to do just everything to get them out of those situations. So until every last cage is empty, I cannot rest. Yep. I cannot give, I cannot give myself a break. I would feel far too guilty to take a holiday or take up a hobby that's got nothing to do with my activism, because every ounce of energy I have has to be poured into saving the lives of animals. So I see this a lot in the activism world. And what ends up happening is, of course, people's lives become very unbalanced, and they end up burning out through sheer exhaustion, but often through also all of the expectations they place on themselves and on each other in this activism sphere. Because we're all so passionate and so dedicated, it becomes very easy to start feeling guilt and experiencing perfectionism, and then judging both ourselves and others. And if we feel like someone else isn't doing it quite right, to tell them, no, you're doing it wrong, you're actually setting the movement back. And so we get infighting and all of those things. So we end up eventually getting to the point where we start feeling ineffective and we're exhausted, and then we hit a wall and often disappear from activism altogether. And so this is where I hear vegans saying things like, I used to be very active, but I've just given up. I can't do it anymore. Now I just keep to myself and I just want to live a quiet vegan life. And what a loss to the world of activism that is, right? So our dystopia can drive us to this unrelenting activism that actually becomes quite unbalanced and unhealthy. So that's the second way in which dystopia can undermine us. We can end up being these very burned out, unhappy individuals who are, again, not setting a good example for others to follow, either for vegans or non-vegans. The third way in which dystopia undermines us is basically traumatizing ourselves. So this is where we expose ourselves to distress in the service of our veganism. And this happens in two ways. One is where we start to believe, and this ties in with that activism burnout as well, that we have this responsibility to bear witness. That as long as the horrible stuff is happening, we have to keep seeing it and witnessing it and honoring that, as if that's going to help the animals. I know some people say I need to see that in order to drive my activism. I'm like, okay, fair enough if that's what it is, but you also need to know how to be able to process what you're seeing in a healthy way. So whether you're seeing this directly, as in you're going onto farms and taking footage and collecting evidence yourself, or you're just seeing the documentaries and the footage from other people, the stuff coming through in your social media feed. If you're seeing that, what is happening is effectively, if you can't process that in a healthy way, you're being traumatized. And so we all hear about post-traumatic stress disorder, which is when something very, very distressing, a survival stress situation occurs to us. And then we don't process that in the way we need to, and we end up carrying that trauma with us as PTSD. What we don't realize is that when we witness horrible things happening to animals, when we force ourselves to bear witness, and we, again, don't know how to deal with that, we end up with secondary traumatic stress. And it's effectively the same as PTSD. We end up carrying that trauma with us. And so unfortunately, we don't realize this. Most people are aware that if horrible things happen to us, we could be traumatized, but we don't make the connection that when it's happening to someone else and we're just witnessing it, it's the same impact. And here's the thing, our brain evolved in a time before screens. So when it is witnessing the horror show on our phone screens or our TV screens or wherever we're watching this footage, it is registering it as if we were there in real time and this was happening in front of us. So it is our brain stem, which is the most ancient part of our brain, it's our survival brain, is registering it as a real and present survival stress to us. And that experience that we have, that nervous system activation when we're sitting there horrified and angry and upset and all the feelings at seeing the footage, what we don't realize is that's actually a fear response. But of course, here we are sitting in a very safe environment. So we tell ourselves it can't possibly be a fear response. I'm horribly upset and it's awful, but I don't know what to do with it. So I'm just going to push it down. I'm going to scroll on to the next thing and hope it won't be quite so bad. Right. And we don't deal with it. And that nervous system activation stays there and it stays embedded in our system. And what happens is then we're ever more readily triggered into states of distress every time we see something similar, until to the point where we can start feeling very unsafe in the world, where we don't even want to step out our front door because, of course, through our lens of dystopia, we're seeing the suffering and the cruelty and abuse everywhere, and every vision of everything, the leather gloves at the hardware store can trigger us to go into a state of distress because it recalls this horrible footage that we saw of a cow being skinned and, all of that. Yeah. So not knowing how to handle this stuff and intentionally exposing ourselves to it is another a sort of aspect of dystopia that we do. Now, one other way that we create survival stress and we don't even realize is through our interactions with non-vegans, particularly the people we really care about, our friends, our family, our loved ones. When we have these interactions and they do push back at us and it becomes personal and it's a judgment, we become, the angry, judgmental vegan, and we feel that distancing and separation. When we have these interactions, we also go into that state of survival stress. And again, if we don't know how to communicate effectively with these folks and resolve these situations in a loving and connecting way, we can end up accumulating trauma as a result of that as well. And for a lot of us, that's even that ends up being a deeper and more compounding trauma than the stuff that we expose ourselves to in terms of the footage and so forth and the experiences, right? Mm-hmm. So that's three things. And the fourth way in which we allow dystopia to undermine ourselves is when we add all of the previous three things together, not knowing how to handle our emotions around it, right? So not having healthy ways of dealing with it, but instead adopting unhealthy coping mechanisms. So we're in this sort of victim mentality where the whole world now feels very threatening. We can't connect or identify with any non-vegans. It's just a struggle to be out there every day. We don't know how to deal with all of the feelings around it because no one teaches us
Right.
unfortunately. So we end up numbing out, right? We end up doing well. Most of us end up numbing out, and we end up numbing out with coping mechanisms that don't serve us in the long term. So I'm talking alcohol, recreational drugs, the junk foods, the things that give us great big dopamine hits, you know, the ice cream and the chips and the chocolate, but also disappearing into other worlds. So that might be binge watching endless TV series where we can just escape our own feelings and dive into someone else's world in a safe kind of way. And so what ends up happening with all of these things is in the long term, they have adverse consequences for our life. They don't add up to us being very healthy, and they may lead us to hiding away and disappearing from the world. And so what that is now presenting to the external world, to the non-vegan world, is this vegan who's not very healthy, who's struggling in lots of ways, emotionally, physical health, and they're very withdrawn. And seem to be unhappy, you know, the miserable, depressed vegan who's hiding away and doesn't want anything to do with us. And so, you know, when that happens to us, we don't end up becoming a very good example or an invitation for non-vegans to follow, right? Yeah. They then use that as a reason to say, look, since she's gone vegan, she's sick all the time, she's so unhappy, she's miserable when she's with us, when she talks, it's all only ever about the animals. It's like she's been brainwashed and she's just judging us and telling us we're wrong. We don't want to be like that.
Right.
And so, yeah, so I'd love to, it'd be great to know what everyone, you know, however much everyone identifies with that loss of relationships, the burning ourselves out, experiencing the survival stress and piling up the trauma, and then adopting those unhealthy coping mechanisms and the impact all of those have on our lives.
Yes. Wow. With the burnout too, as you were talking, I was thinking about how, you know, so many of us, we come to this and we are just full of this, like, not just compassion, but this need to help make the world better. And we can often, because we're led by that emotion, be easily manipulated by some of the leaders, even within the vegan movement, who see us as like, these are the people that I'm going to use to, like, you know, and they're going to take advantage of us, because they know that if they just come at it from the perspective of, well, if you join my organization and you help me with this type of activity, then this is how you will be able to help save the animals and help save the world and make a difference. And then they will just keep taking and taking and taking from you. And so it's super important for us, as we become aware of this idea that we are being so pulled into this by that emotion, to work very hard to remain with our eyes open to that. Just because we're all in the same movement doesn't mean we all have the same motivations. And some people, even in the vegan movement, still just want to be in control and still have, whether it's a celebrity or a prominent status, or just be the name, you know, spread across all these different activities and these, whether they're rescues or whatever it is. So yeah, and that can burn us out, right? They're going to work us to the point where we are going to hide, and we're going to be like, I'm not the vegan activist anymore. I am going to curl up in this little hole, and I am going to eat all of the vegan, you know, ice cream and cookies and whatever, and just leave me alone. And you're right. Like, we miss out on an opportunity to share just how really, truly beautiful and joyful living a vegan life can be. And yeah.
That's it. And that's the flip side. And that is, and so we've talked about all the horrors. Yeah. We've talked about all the terrible ways that veganism impacts us, or our dystopia impacts us. But that's the thing, we get to completely turn that around. So once we become aware of these things, there is a solution to every one of them. Right? So there is a way to actually communicate with the people we care about in such a way where we're not trying to force our lens of animal suffering onto them, right? Because, we think we're trying to take their lens off, but we're just trying to force our lens off on them. Instead, what we can actually do is find effective ways to help them remove their own lens of carnism. And the thing is, we can't, like I said, we can't rip it off their face.
Yeah.
They have to remove it. Or what we can do is to be there on their journey to support them in gradually dismantling that lens. And there are structured ways of communicating with people. And I'm not the first person to be teaching these. Claire herself has got, amazing examples and approaches. So does the wonderful Melanie Joy, who's, over in the US, who teaches these wonderful ways of communicating with people that does allow them to, in fact, open their eyes and remove these lenses. So that is possible. These are skills that we need to learn because we weren't taught how to do that. So that's the kind of work I do with my clients as well, and with my with my group that I have on Facebook as well. We can talk about that later. So that's one thing. The other side of it is, that the activism, it's wonderful to be engaged in activism. It can be so incredibly empowering as long as we keep it in perspective to make sure it's one thing that we do in our lives, but there are also things that we do purely for joy and for pleasure that, refill our cup, so to speak, right? Mm-hmm. That way, once our cup is full, we can give from the overflow, and the activism can come from the overflow. And when we have overflow, we can be sustainable. We can keep doing it forever. But when that activism is draining our cup, eventually it runs out, and that's when we go and hide away with our, our chocolate.
Yeah.
So being aware of that, and yes, you're absolutely right. It's simply human nature that when someone gives, we keep taking. And so when we turn up as, bright-eyed, bushy-tailed young activist, and we just want to help, those activism leaders who are constantly struggling for volunteers will gladly take everything you've got. They're often so busy just running their organization that they're not equipped to look after our mental well-being, our emotional health. So they're not across all the ways in which we're struggling. And so, they may put things like guilt and their perfectionism on us. They are so dedicated to what they're working on, even if it's not about ego and making themselves, the celebrity, even if they're completely behind the scenes, but they may be very attached to the particular approach that they've got to their activism. And they may come down on people quite hard if they step out of line and don't seem to be representing the organization or the animals in the way that this leader has decided is the best way to do it. And then, yes, we can end up feeling, all kinds of bereft, like we failed them, we failed the animals, and so on as well. So putting that into perspective and seeing these people as, they are just humans just like us, with their own lenses and their own feelings, and they're going to be imperfect, and we don't have to treat them like gods, and we don't have to, just because they say something that leaves us feeling guilty for not showing up when we need a break, we don't have to take that on ourselves, right? That's just them expressing their stuff. Mm-hmm. So putting things into perspective, in terms of those relationships is going to really help us. The survival stress part, we don't have to keep traumatizing ourselves, right? And so if we're already out there and being active and communicating effectively with people around veganism, we're doing all the things, we don't need to keep bearing witness to the horror if that is not actually needed to drive our actions forward. And I do work with activists who in their activism have no choice but to be witnessing this stuff. They're bearing witness firsthand because of the work that they're doing, or it's their job to try and get this out there to media and other places. So they have to sit with the footage and edit it and choose the most powerful music to go with it and all of those things. And so for these folks, I'm like, okay, obviously that's cool. That's a choice you're making to expose yourself to this. But now let's do it in such a way where it's in doses that you can handle. And after every handleable dose, you go through this process of dealing with everything that comes up, dealing with that survival stress and getting it out of your system so you're not left with a trauma. And that's something that's available to every one of us as well, that process. It's far too much for me to cover in this session, but I would absolutely invite people to to look into it further. Come and join my Facebook group where I talk about this at length and do lots of trainings. And then let's have a look at why we're adopting those unhelpful coping mechanisms. It's because we don't know don't know how to deal with our emotions. We're going to push them down or like shout them at the next unwitting non-vegan who triggers us, right? And leading to further rupture in relationships and so forth. So again, it's actually, this is a secret that none of us seem to know because no one tells us. Our parents, our caregivers, our teachers don't know this, but our feelings are the result of the thoughts that we're having. So we absolutely have more control over our feelings than we think we do. And again, we get to choose the thoughts we have by consciously thinking about the lenses that we choose to put on, the beliefs that we choose to adopt. And when we do experience a feeling, an emotion that's negative, the frustration when a conversation's gone badly with a non-vegan or any negative emotion that we're feeling that we don't know how to deal with, we can feel it and release it in just 2 minutes, because this is the thing that most of us don't know. Neuroscientists know this. When we have a thought that leads us to have a feeling, that feeling is basically a set of chemical processes and reactions and nerve signals in our body that will dissipate in about 1.5 minutes after we've had the thought that triggered it. Now, as long as we don't keep having the thought, that feeling will dissipate. So if we're feeling terrible, if we're feeling angry, we're feeling frustrated, all we need to do is recognize, oh, we're having a feeling. It doesn't feel good. Let's just sit with it, knowing that it is going to dissipate. Let's just sit with it for a minute. Let's just feel the sensations of it in our body. Okay, it's actually just a set of like tingling and pressure and maybe a bit of heat. It's actually not that bad. I don't need to numb it out or hide away from it or spew it out of my body. I can actually just let these chemical signals dissipate and the sensations go. And then let's have a look at what I was thinking that led me to feeling that. And okay, what is something more helpful I might think that could lead me to now harness the motivation that those feelings create, right? Because we've now created this driving force, this anger, the frustration is like a motivating kind of force. How can we use that for something strategic and effective, right? What would we need to think about this thing that would lead us to feel simply motivated and inspired instead of angry and frustrated? And then from there, we get to take action in such a way that is actually going to be effective. Then we can start to plan to communicate with people in a way that they can hear, and so on. And then when we do this process, when we just take the 2 minutes to feel our feelings, we don't have to go and dive into Netflix or reach for the bottle of wine or whatever it might have been. And we get to do healthy behaviors instead. Now we get to instead be connecting with people in healthy ways, showing up as, a happy, healthy, well-balanced vegan living our best life who has got interests outside of activism. And who's looking after themselves and is showing the world that it is possible. It is possible to be a thriving vegan.
Yeah. Oh my goodness. Ooh, thank you for that. I was thinking about the bearing witness piece, because I used to be one of those people that was like, I absolutely need to bear witness in all the ways. The town I live in has an auction that takes place once a week, and anytime either I was out driving or my husband and I were out driving and we forgot what day of the week it was and we went down the road that would go past it, I always I would open my car window and I would listen to the sounds and I would apologize out loud and see the animals there at the auction, knowing where they're going next. And it hurt so much. And my husband would always say, you don't have to do this every time. You can leave the window up and you can look away. And I would always be like, no, absolutely not. And the same thing with videos that would come up. I would see a video and be like, I have to watch this. And there are now 3, and I'm not going to share any details, but there are 3 that kind of happened in quick succession. Not the same day, but kind of like over the course of a few days. And the level of cruelty and or anguish that was in these videos, every once in a while, they just randomly come to me. And the pain. And so everything you were talking about, this trauma, us being traumatized by these things, all of that comes back. And it feels as if I will never unsee those videos. But I am very thankful, and I'm sure many of the listeners will be too, that you have shared this process that we can, pause this podcast and rewind and listen to over and over again until we get it. of being able to recognize that feeling, the thought, and then find our way through that so that we can be effective and not have it shut us down or take us into a place that isn't healthy and that honestly takes us away from the service of the animals. So that's another thing too, right? Every time someone is like that they need to numb out because it's been so painful, like we're missing out on opportunities to be effective not voices. I don't mean to say that because I don't feel like animals are voiceless. They just speak a different language than we do. But for us to have the ability to be more effective. We are like right at the hour, so I want to be respectful of your time. I know it's the start of your day, so I'm sure you've got a zillion more things to do. But if we could quickly, I would love to ask you one more question. Mm-hmm. How does hummus show up in your life?
Well, hummus shows up with great force and frequently. So hummus is amazing. Hummus was the thing that I discovered when I did go vegan that made the big difference, because I had considered myself to be something of a cheese addict. I always had at least 4 different types of cheese in the fridge for all occasions. And cheese went into pretty much every meal or on top of every meal. And that was the one thing that I thought I was going to really struggle with. And hummus was this amazing revelation because it gave me the saltiness, the creaminess, and that slight sort of tanginess, that quality that cheese has, that I was able to pretty much just substitute into pretty much any meal.
Nice.
And now it's 9 years later. I've been vegan for 9 years, and hummus is still there every day in pretty much every savory meal, because whether it's Italian or Mexican or Mediterranean or just a roast dinner, the hummus is in there or on there. Yeah. So, it's basically, it's taking the place of cheese, but it's so much more these days, so it's pretty much in all the meals, and it's very much a very quick and easy snack for dipping pretty much anything into whenever I need it. But it's an absolute go-to. So between my husband and I, we go through a 1 kilo tub of hummus every week, which in the US terms is like, that's over 2 pounds, right? Mm-hmm. So yeah. That's hummus for us.
That is fantastic. When I went vegetarian, I became what I call a cheesetarian, and it wound up on everything. And I never, ever thought to substitute hummus. What a genius. Because you're right. The salty, the creamy, the tangy, it's all there. Anita, I wish I could talk to you for another 2 hours. But I know you have to go, and anyway, it's time to go. But links to your website, your Facebook group, every way that people can connect with you will be in the show notes. So they'll be able to just click right from the show notes and join you wherever they are showing up. I cannot thank you enough for this incredible conversation. I'm so thankful for this time together.
Thank you, Kimberly. Really appreciate it.
Welcome back. This is absolutely one of those episodes that deserves multiple listens with a notebook. To connect with Anita, visit her website, theveganmindsetcoach.com. Follow her on Instagram at theveganmindsetcoach. And join her private Facebook group, Unstoppable Vegans. As always, the links will be in the show notes, so you can click right in and get right there. I hope you found this episode helpful and inspiring. Please subscribe to the podcast so you never miss an episode. And if you're loving it, please give Did You Bring the Hummus a 5-star rating and leave a review. It's an easy way to keep supporting the show. Be sure to share these episodes with your friends. If you're finding something good here, they will too. Follow me on Facebook and Instagram at Did You Bring the Hummus. Visit my website, didyouBringTheHummus.com, for more information about me, updates on what I'm working on, new podcast episodes, and all things vegan. Tune in next time for my interview with Sally Malanga, founder of Ecobella and Boon for All, and fellow Jersey girl. Thanks for listening.